Okay, welcome everyone. This is Sociology. We have guests today. Professor Johnny McDowell-Hyde, who is a sociology professor here at Hill College. And she's also a pastor and
recently retired.
Yes. And
Yes.
also a grandmother of a newly signed basketball star at North Texas. And Mr. Greg Davis, who is a kind of in the academia arts. He was general manager of WRR Radio FM. He's worked with Texas Tech, National Endowment for the Arts, Texas Commission on the Arts, and probably 100 other things. They both have plenty of stories that we really can't get into today. We have a really short time to try to get this concept of racial identity out there. And, you know, I was trying to think last night, you know, what am I going to ask them? And it's hard to think, racial identity. I just imagine students groaning, oh no, another talk about race. But I don't know why, but we don't groan, right? Or do we? It's kind of a advantages and disadvantages. It's kind of interesting topic, yet it's kind of a sad topic that we have to talk about it. But so let's begin. I'm gonna kind of be in the roaming around here. But Professor Dallerhide, can you explain? Have you taught anything like this, like race, or in your classes?
Yes, I see one student. I think I've had him in my class. I don't know. I thought I had. What's your name?
Me? Samuel.
Oh, okay. Nope, didn't have you, Samuel. You look like somebody. Yeah. So I don't see anybody that I've had in my class. Yes, I have. In fact, in the two different classes that I've taught, both dealt a little with race, one more than the other. In Intro to Sociology, we discussed, of course, the various races. I have taught at Texas Wesleyan minority groups, where we talk in much more detail about racial groups, and then in marriage and family. So I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Davis, have you discussed anything like this with groups or with?
Well, let me put it this way. When you're black, you're always in a teaching mode.
Yes.
I'll start there. Mm-hmm. What do I mean by that? Mm-hmm. You don't even know it. When you run across individuals or communities where they've never seen another black person, literally, that's a teaching moment. Even though you don't know they've never seen one of us or one of them, as they may say, you're constantly in a teaching moment. Life is full of teachable moments. Race is just one part of it. And I'm always amazed and not surprised. I've been an avid reader, and I would say the person who taught me this was an author, James Baldwin. I don't know if any of you all have ever read any of his works. James Baldwin was probably the 20th century's most prolific essayist and novelist. Came out of the Harlem Renaissance. But anyway, he wrote a very seminal piece, several of them. One was called A Stranger in the Village. And he had gone to Paris in the 40s and had gone to this chateau in this place in northern France. It was snow, all snow, this village that was living as though they were in the 17th century. And this was the 60s. And he discovered he was the only black person in the village. Hence the title, A Stranger in the Village. And I read that book in high school, and it didn't make sense at the time until I went abroad and was a stranger in a village called Budapest. And I was on the train, and this elderly lady with, I thought, a grandson, and she kept looking at me on this tight train, just packed train. And I'm the only black person on the train. I'm standing and the train is rocking, and this lady's coquettishly looking at me, glancing and smiling. And it was a friendly smile, and you smile back. We got off at the next station, and the young man who spoke English said, "My grandmother has never seen a black person before. She wants to touch your head." And I said, "Okay." I bent over, no hair.
Did you have hair there?
I had no hair. And there was that's a teachable moment. You find yourself in situations where you are the only one, and they have never seen one of them before, and it's no big deal. You realize it's just a human curiosity to see someone you may have seen on television, but in real person, it's like, there's one, sort of thing. So, and that, race comes to mind. It's not unusual. I was in Budapest, Hungary, so I wouldn't expect that. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Yeah, so I guess there's aspects of maybe isolation or the only one, but yet there's aspects of belonging, I assume, to a group. Is there a sense of belonging too when you feel isolated?
I've never felt isolated. I've really never felt isolated.
In the context of you're the only one in that situation.
Now, in that, you get the sense that because whatever the subject matter that brought us in a particular room is the utmost issue. Why are we all here today? Is it a meeting? Is it a friendship? Then that. It's only in the conversation that you learn that the experiences are different or similar. And you go, oh, and it breaks it down a little bit more. Oh, you eat graham crackers too, mm-hmm. Or you drink red wine as well. It's, and in that regard, or you say, I comb my hair differently or this or that. So there are always going to be differences. But having said that, in the place we call the United States of America, race was at the very beginning of the founding of this country, that could not have made it without a group of people that were of a different color in a different country, because they all came from the same continent and they were all of the same color. They were black. So at the very beginning and founding of this nation, you had a whole set of people based on the color of their skin that were identified as only doing one thing because of that. And I think that is the conversation that has propelled this country's dialogue on race. That's what my historical readings and journeys through the South and the first colony, Virginia, has shown me and is borne out. But the great equalizer in that, and having to understand that was the brilliancy of the founding fathers. Very few sisters was the Constitution. And that is what we're trying to live up to. And race is one part of it that the Constitution addressed and left a lot of it nebulous for you young people to figure out.
Professor Dollarhide, can you educate us on maybe what types of identities there could be with people, say maybe racial or cultural, or what, maybe you can help define for us what identity might be.
It might be. Well, one thing I always teach my students is that we have to understand that race is a social construction. That means that you were not born black, white, yellow, red, purple, whatever. That's not how you were born, but we believe that. That's all we've ever been taught, that that's your race. Race is socially constructed, meaning that those racial tabs that we have been given, being Anglo, being white, being Asian or whatever, were made by man just to make categorization and census taking easy. Those are almost stigmas now, because we take people and we categorize and we put them into that group. You're black, you're white, and yet, being a minister, a pastor, I like to bring it back and relate it to our DNA. And we all have the same DNA, simply meaning that we're told in the Bible, for those of you who are Christians and may believe in the Bible or even just heard it, that there is one blood, one race, well, not one race, one blood, one Father of us all. That would have to mean that we have a universal DNA, that we're all from the same bloodline. And yet we've allowed this thing of race to separate us, and this whole idea of ethnocentrism, where because blacks in this country were slaves, they were the workers, and we've even connected it to Bible truths. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. It's called cognitive dissonance, where we have to make what we believe true. But we have allowed this thing to separate us and bring out what we call ethnocentrism. My way is the best way. My way is the only way. Unless you assimilate to the way that I look in this country, I do things in this country, I speak, I believe, then you're an outcast. And Peggy McIntosh came up with this idea of white privilege. And as we talk about that in my classes, there are students who just cannot wrap their minds around the things that she expounds and she talks about. She says, I know I have privilege because when I go into a department store, I never have to worry about anybody following me. Doesn't even cross my mind. When I call the police, I don't have to worry about them arresting me for the problem that I call them for. That's a white privilege. I don't have to worry about possibly being shot doing my job because I'm white, and that's a privilege. And we tend to believe, well, yeah, but I have problems too. The police stopped me. They gave me a traffic ticket. I didn't have my driver's license, and I had a ticket. I had to go to court. That's a total misunderstanding of the problem of race in this country. And those sorts of things keeps us from trying to understand each other. And I'll stop with this. doing my doctoral research, when I first went to Cleveland, trying to do that research, I'm working with pastors, with ministers of churches, white churches, black churches. Some of you may be from Cleveland, and I probably have worked or know your pastor. And in so doing, in trying to get focus groups where we could just sit and talk. And at the time I was really doing that research, the whole idea of the Southern statues that was a big deal. So we kind of made that the center, the focus. There's a statue of Colonel Cleburne in Cleburne, and it's so small most people have never even seen it. But the discussion was about removing these statues, and I really found out in that discussion, I came out with 3 things that keeps us apart when we're trying to talk about racial reconciliation. And one is we don't listen to each other. When I tell my story, if you can't relate to it in your mind, if your cognitive dissonance is saying to you that, but that's not the way it is, or that group of people, I've always been led to believe that should be what happens to them. That should be how they're treated. We don't listen. That keeps us apart. We don't communicate well. And sometimes I get excited and very passionate about what I'm saying. And when I take it an octave too high, nobody wants to hear what. So we've got to communicate in a way that's not intimidating to each other if we want to understand each other. And then the third thing I found is we're not a compassionate people. We don't try to have understanding for each other's plight or where we've been or where we're going. So those things I did come out, did learn, still working on that. But I hope that answered your question. I probably went all around the barnyard, but those are some of the things I found.
Yeah. Obviously, there's aspects of separation between what we call races, and I always put races in quotes because it is a social construction. Mm-hmm. But what about the belonging aspects that I wanted to get to today, such as identity? Can I have a, quote, black identity? Can I participate in a black identity? Or is that exclusive to its members?
I'm smiling because we do this without even knowing we're doing it. Every time you go to an Italian restaurant and you say, I want to have Italian food today, that is a cultural identity with that group of people. When you go to a Mexican restaurant, that is an identity that all races can identify with because that is food that comes from a people. Here again, what is the food of black people that came from the continent of Africa? We really don't know, do we? Because they were not allowed to bring that part of their culture with them, except for a few seeds that the women hid on their bodies and in their bodies as they were dragged from there. There were seeds like okra. There are other seeds that I can't come to mind right now. But we are a people that have made a way out of nothing. So we do participate in other cultures and other races without really being conscious that we're doing it. I would also ask the question, how many of you have had another person of another race in your home? Okay. And how many of you have friends of another race? We're doing a lot better now.
Yes.
We're doing a lot better. If that question had been asked 40, 50 years ago, dear hand would have raised. The other way we participate in other cultures is culturally through the arts. Now that's a big word with 3 letters. What does that really mean? Every culture has a way of enjoying themselves, whether it's through dance, music, whatever. You identify with where you're from historically because that's the music, that's the writing, that came from that culture. The cultural arts is called the cultural arts for a reason. They reflect that community's look at themselves. I still go back to race and how this dialogue really is very unique to the United States of America. Based on a country that was formed for freedom. They were outcasts from their own countries, European countries predominantly. Yes, it was a terrible time. We had to come to grips with that. But once the genie was out of the bag, once you brought a group of people over here, and guess what? They were your age and younger. They weren't bringing 60-year-olds on the boat. They needed the young ones, the ones that could bear children. That's a really, really important aspect of this heinous incident that occurred. And really, it could have been yellow people. It could have just as well been brown people. But they found a way because the ships were over there and they were cheap and it was all a negotiation. But believe me, this was economic development justified through their faith. That is, once you get your head around that, it's very difficult to untangle the institutions that supported this incident of race getting. They stuck with that, what was called then the dark continent of people. It's really, you can't untangle that in 1 or 2 or 3 generations. The Constitution is the framework for doing it. And we all know it is not a perfect document, but it is the document that we all use to discuss this subject around. And it is getting better. This is still the greatest country in the world. It really is. How many of you have spent any time outside of the country or been outside of the country? Great. I believe more and more Americans should travel abroad. I think that is one of the reasons that we can't deal with what's going on. And I also think it's the younger generations that can always lead us along on this. But it's here. I mean,
Sorry.
but I don't really think that the issue of who we are based on the color of our skin is as bad as who we are that we execute things such as the penal system. There is where the danger lies. it is without a fact that if you look at the institution of incarceration, it is not a coincidence that that institution took off like a rocket once emancipation was signed.
So does all of these experiences contribute to this identity concept that is, all of these experiences flow to make up this racial identity?
Mm-hmm.
Can you solidify that picture for us?
Well, we really should not have to be each other to understand and relate to each other. So your question, so how can I relate to another culture? How can I really be a part of another culture? I recently saw a movie I recommended to all of you. I think it just came out, called The Hate You Give. Now, I think it was based on a song from Tupac. But the interesting thing about it is there was a black young lady and her brother whose parents put them into a predominantly white school because of all the mess going on in their area school. And her experience was that there was a false way of relating. In other words, some of our friends wanted to speak black or act black, which was really insulting because you accept people for the way they are and who they are. So if you want to relate to a person, then you don't relate by carrying out those stereotypes that, hey, bro, and all that kind of stuff. Not that. You relate to them by being who they are. But in the movie, the interesting part was there was a big something that happened with somebody being shot. And, of course, the news media did all of the thing about the policeman that was shot or being accused of doing the shooting. That's what it was. And how terrible it was on his family and all the stress they had gone through. Nothing said about the kid who was shot by the policeman, who had no weapon, and just made a quick move and was just shot. And so that caused a bridge in their relationship. What caused the bridge? Not relating and understanding to each other. The black girl was angry with her white friend because she was saying, well, he had a family too, and he was shot without doing anything, just being there. I think he reached for a hairbrush, and she could not relate to her, the white friend, couldn't relate to the black friend, not empathizing and sympathizing with the policeman's family. And so that's where we have these differences. We really could be more a part of each other if we were just willing to break down our own stereotypes about each other and just relate to each other as people. And the second thing I wanted to mention is, for sure, many of you raise your hands that you've had friends of another race in your home. But we have to know, based on what was shown in the news just this week or latter part of last week, that there are still young people your age in high school and in college who still don't understand that making fun of people of another race, particularly if you're white and you're saying things about African Americans, is not the way that we bring healing in this country. So to think that race is no longer an issue, that we don't need to have discussions like that, you're very wrong. Because it's not just the older people who have problems. And we know our grandmothers and mothers and great granddads and mothers and stuff have problems based out of their experiences. But when that falls down on you and you continue to carry it and perpetuate it, then that's where we get to the point where Professor is asking the question about us relating where we cannot relate because we keep pushing these stereotypes. And then the last thing I want to mention, my only vice in watching television, I seldom watch it, maybe CNN, but I do watch Channel 13. I love Channel 13. But I was looking at, my vice, though, is Empire. It comes on Wednesday night. I love it because I can just get in another unrealistic world, and it's just black people with money and class and all of that kind of stuff. But in the story on Empire last night, in the episode, sisters got angry with each other. One sister who was being beaten up by her child who had a mental problem was angry with her other sister, Cookie is what they call her, who called the police. And although the child was beating her, kicking her, and probably would have killed her, but she was angry that her sister Cookie called the police because she knew what the police would do to a black child, or what has happened to black males just coming in and seeing them. Now that's reality. You may think it's a show, but that is reality. When you walk, police can walk into a place and they see a security guard who has a gun holding a victim, and they just shoot him, automatically shoot him. That speaks to our mentality about race. That means we still have a long way to go, not a short way. And this is the vehicle that we use to get there. Yeah.
I wonder if you could expand, Mr. Davis, on the relating to another culture or race.
Okay. First of all, this was the one thing I wanted to get across today, and I want to thank Mike for inviting me on this panel. I've not taught this, but I've lived it. The subject. We do ourselves a great disservice when we equate race as only black and white. That is a huge misnomer. The reason, in my opinion, it has evolved into a black and white issue are many. When immigrants that are non-European come into this country, it doesn't take them a full day, whether they know the language or not, to look at this thing called television and see who is being arrested. They're in no way want to be part of that people, nor identify with those people that are constantly within the first story or the second story of a newscast. I just ask you to think about that a little bit. We are very visually stimulated people. That's the human part of us. In this country, it's pretty apparent who is always in trouble. And you can define that either way you want. But there is one group of people that has a long history of understanding and have learned how to fight for human rights. No other people in this country has fought like the African American. All the other races have looked back and said, okay, we see, but we don't want to get out there. But we're going to take a little of this, a little of that, and learn from it. Look, this is not the first time. during slavery that American citizens have been put in cages and isolated in the middle of deserts, on borders, in mountaintops. Let's be very clear about that. We have to be honest with ourselves about that. We have forgotten about the Japanese internment camps. And what happened on the Texas border was not new, nor was it surprising if we really were honest with ourselves. No one was really shocked that that happened. It has happened before. Look at what has happened to the Irish in New York City. Look at what happened to the Germans in this country during World War II. So I wanted to put that on the table, that we do ourselves a disservice when we discuss race in only black and white terminology. But I understand why it's done. Because no other group of people have been on the forefront and have been enslaved and trying to get out of it and using the tactics of the Constitution, civil disobedience. Civil disobedience. Okay? So, and I will always go back to your generation probably will not be able to fix it, and I don't think that's a pessimistic output. It's just a realistic one. But it gets better every generation. There is nothing wrong with identifying racially with your group. It is a pride thing. That's why we participate in all these ethnic celebrations in this country. You know,
That's right.
whether it's Irish, German, Lithuanian, we all raise our flags that are not American flags during those festive periods to celebrate that. There should be more of that, in my opinion, because that's who we are. And, but yes, we want people to be proud and identify. One of the things you can always ask that I do is, where are you from? And then let them define it by their answer. I'm from Midlothian. I'm from Denison. Before, where were your people from? Where was your grandfather from? Those are very, very important questions and very important answers, because it gives us a little bit more information other than I drive a BMW and you drive a Ford that's boring stuff. That's the consumerism that we've been taught to constantly consume, to buy. That is an economic trap. Now, and a lot of the races in America believe if I own a Mercedes and drive a Mercedes, they'll see I'm an American. That you'd be surprised. They go, I drive a Mercedes. What they really are saying is they bought into the trap of capitalism. They have really, the consumerism. And we prove, there are people of all races that are billionaires. Okay? It is about loving your identity and loving who you are and not having to be ashamed of who you are and not having to speak for everybody within your race.
By the way, I didn't have you to be representative
No,
of any group.
no.
You're the best scholars I know on
race. And that was to that. But it's just something that I think is worth thinking about. Nobody expects a white person to speak for all white people. And then, what is white? I've always been confused about that. Where are you white? Where your grandfather from? He's Irish, he's Polish, he's Brit. Is that white? When they say white, they're basing it solely on the color of your skin, which I think is, I believe it's wrong. I'm more interested in meeting someone from Norway because I've never, met anyone from Norway in the United States. It's a beautiful country, So that's the beauty of this country, is that we can all come from different other geographic spaces here to here. And then our children are born here, and then their children. And yes, there are going to be some mixing of the races because you cannot legislate love. You just can't. It's been attempted. That is the most powerful thing. I mean, you're going to get around that. Whoa. And it was on the books. The only race in America that was forbidden to marry outside their race was the African American. And that was only resolved in the 70s with the Loves. So it's also important for us to know our history and to know who your parents are and where they came from and where your grandfather came from and where your great-grandfather came from. Because I think what you'll find is we all came from agrarian people, tribal. And that's not, they were weavers, they were sheep herders, they were cattlemen or whatever. This is the only country where all of this works. And don't let anyone tell you it's not working here. It is working here. And I will add this. The most segregated in America is high noon on Sunday. That's getting better with interdenominational churches because religion is important to Americans. But is it really when you try to limit what you can believe in and what you can worship? Religious freedom is very, very important to culture and race. So I think that this is, for me, is easily discussed and talked about and mitigated in a way, but it's at an individual micro level. The fact you go to, that you dance and you listen to music, that is the most intercultural thing we do, is listen to music. And where do we think country and western comes from, or soul comes from, or classical music comes from? It comes from different races. So we do interplay in this thing a lot. It gets a little bit trickier, nastier when it comes to love. That's the only thing that scares people to death. Is just think of two young people or older or whatever, and they find someone, they meet someone, and oh my God, I never thought I'd love somebody of a different race. And then the second thing, how do I explain this back home? The shoulders drop. So, oh my God, what are we into now? But if you look back, your grandfather's generation did it. Your great-grandfather, great-mothers did it. The biggest change on race that occurred in the United States for the better was when our soldiers came back, those that did, from World War I and World War II. Do you realize the most single important thing for love that happened in this country is when World War II soldiers came back, and guess what they did? They started holding hands in public. That had never happened in this country. Husband and wives holding hands in public never happened until World War II because the soldiers went abroad and that's what they saw. And they were so glad to be back. It's those little things that I think move us along a lot. And then interracially, you even see it now in this country. Before you were, oh my gosh, we got to sneak and be together. You stand on the other side of the restaurant and I'll be on the other side. And then we'll just go up to the bar together and then we'll just get in the crowd. The machinations we put ourselves through to hide this is absurd. You know, think about it. Think about it. So it's not just black and white issues. And I do believe, and I know it's a cliche to say love is the answer, but sometimes cliches are good. Sometimes they're good. And you don't have to give up who you are or who your heritage is to love someone of another culture, of another race. You really don't. You're expected to tell your children, to be honest with your children. Your grandfather was Lithuanian, I was French, or whatever it is. And Africa is a huge continent. Believe it or not, they don't speak the same languages on the whole continent. So it's this concept of race is gonna be discussed. I just want us to have a conversation that really starts historically. Well, my people are from, my grandfather was, and a lot of us don't even know the history of our own families. And this genealogy stuff is great, I suppose. I haven't done it, but I am an oral history fanatic. Tell me where you're from. Don't Google and all that. You don't know nothing about me by Googling or what's on my Facebook. You know, that is so false and so scary to me. It's to have 1,500 friends and you're 20 years old and you think they're your friends. That word friend is a human interaction. That is not a technology thing of I like what you said or I can doctor up my picture, lighten my skin, put a wig on. Come on, don't fall for that. And don't get me wrong, the internet has been incredible. I no longer have to learn a language. There's an app for that. I no longer have to learn a language. I had 2 years of Latin in high school and 2 years in college. What for? There's an app for that. I don't even have to learn French now. There's an app for that. Is that really who we want to be? Give me your grandmama's recipe. That was incredible. You know, the further we get away and involved in this technology, the less we really know people. And that's about race and culture.
I want to invite some questions for the panelists as we get closer or try to understand race and identity.
Yeah.
I was wondering if there are any aspects of black racial identity that you can identify as being negative but widely taught to youth, or like passed on, like consciously or subconsciously, that affect black racial identity negatively.
You know, I
That's
was
a great
thinking,
question.
yeah, it is.
That's a great question.
I thought of a couple of different things, and they speak really directly to your question. And one is about racial identity, that we should be, all of us, proud to keep and identify with. You know, one of the functions of the family is to pass down that heritage. And ethnicity is a shared heritage. So yes, we do have churches in our community that are still predominantly white or predominantly black, and will always be, because there is a connection there. There's a connection in the black community where those churches are that will keep those churches predominantly black. There's a connection in the neighborhood where those predominantly white churches are because of cultural heritage. So yes, we should be proud and maintain a cultural heritage, but it should be we should be willing to share our heritage, not keep it so that this is the way we do things. We eat soul food at Thanksgiving, and so nobody else should be a part of that. But we need to open up and share our heritage, but yet understand it is my heritage. I am proud of it. I won't lose it just because I assimilate into another group. I want to keep some things that I've been taught. I did do the genealogy testing, and my roots are from the Mindi tribe in Africa, almost 96% sure, the Mindi tribe. That's good for me to know because I know nothing about the Mindi tribe. But I'm going to learn more and more because everybody wants to know their roots. They want to know where they're from. That builds pride. But at the same time, when that kind of pride makes you where you feel you're above everybody else, that's where we have the problems. When we look at Colin Kaepernick, many of us don't really try to understand what he's saying and what he's trying to do. Why? Because that news media that we were talking about, or the blasting that we hear says, oh, it's against the flag, it's against the military, it's against our veterans. I'm sure in his family he had veterans as well. But the idea is not about veterans. The idea is about inequality to a certain race of people that he's trying to draw attention to. But we allow ourselves to think that civil disobedience is something that we should not do if it does not fit in with the way we see things. So therefore we say that this idea of him not standing before the flag, and yet we don't make as much of a fuss or ruckus about a coach who has sexually abused many of the athletes who are going, that's okay. We'll just put him in jail, lock him up. But Colin Kaepernick has changed the whole conversation in the country simply because he's kneeling. The fact that he's kneeling says he respects the flag, but we don't see that because we have stopped thinking for ourselves. And we allow our minds to be shaped by what we see on television, about what we hear somebody else say. And that also keeps us at bay with one another. But yes, we ought to maintain some of those things that are unique to our culture, but not ethnocentrically, that this is the only way that it should be.
I think that's an incredibly good question. And I'm going to answer it this way. Be wary of stereotypes. I think they're very dangerous in this country. I think that, and specifically you ask, so I'm going to do this off the top of my head, which is dangerous, that all black men are athletically gifted. I can assure you that ain't true here. And that may be a joking stereotype. The other one in the black community, I think, is that black people are great entertainers. We can dance, we can sing, we can, those are the professions we've been allowed to participate in that are safe. But if you look at the history of those, why that is, it was the only thing we were allowed to do, to entertain the master. So, that goes back to Step and Fetch It, that goes back to blackface, that goes back to all of this stuff. And so those are safe professions until they became paid professions. Until the capitalist owners took over sports as entertainment And sports became New York Stock Exchange venues. The professional athlete. And who wouldn't want the best athletes when you've got money behind it? And so now it's this whole cottage industry of sports as community entertainment, how we push our kids now. You can have a career in that. That is relatively new. That we start grooming these children for find a sport that you can be the best in and you can make the most money in. But for blacks, boxing, it started out with boxing. Jack Johnson. And look what happened to him. So those, I think, are both, I don't know if it's completely negative or completely positive. It's just something that's come to my mind about how dangerous stereotype. They're like bombs that have fallen in the war fields of Europe that haven't exploded yet. And there are thousands and thousands of them. And so, and then when the athletes get enough money and clout and they realize that they are on a plantation they didn't expect. But my God, look at the price of that ticket to be a professional athlete.
I think also part of what could be a negative attribute of identity may be actually a social class behavior. I forgot what you call it. The book La Vida, Life of the Poor, how the poor will engage in behaviors that help them survive today, but not lead them in the future. So it may be a social class thing that some negative attributes could be existing.
So when you say be wary of stereotypes, is that for, obviously when you're observing another, or you're trying to look at what another race, the different aspects of another race, how it makes a difference, what they've been through and how their heritage is passed down. But is it also be wary of, there are certain stereotypes that people embrace because they feel as though it makes them more part of a group?
Yes.
Is that also where you're going with that, with the athletes? And
I would say so. And I think this is the reverse also. I think people of color must be cautious with the stereotypes we have of what I call white people, which I hate that term, but we're going to, in the context of lighter skinned people, the stereotype that they are smarter than they're the smarter race. It's also a very dangerous stereotype. And that is one that is predominant. It really is. And it's and then all other cultures and races must subjugate ourselves to that level of we want to be like them. The bar is moved constantly on who and what is called smart. The bar constantly moves. And it's going to move anyway. But just in general, I've just been, because I've gotten it, because I was in classical music, and I can't tell you the number of things that people have said to me, and I've been at the highest echelons of this field, in some of the greatest halls in the world, and sitting around some of the most influential arts institutions, and been the only one that's black, not the only one of color, but the only one of black. And it's like, they're like, oh, you like classical music? How did you get here? And my response is, because I understand the blues, which is true. I couldn't have done what I did without understanding the blues. The blues is where my people come from. The only original music given to the rest of the world is gospel. Everything else stems off gospel. Everything. And how did gospel come about from a people that didn't even have the Christian Bible? You enslave a group of people, and the only thing they were allowed to read, and they couldn't read, they were read it to. And the language of the Bible is so beautiful. It is absolutely an incredible, historically beautiful, poetic stories. And they took those stories and turned them into songs of hope. That's some brilliant work. That's some pretty freaking brilliant work.
I want to get to more questions in here before we end. Madison?
So I have a question, because when I was growing up, I heard this a lot, and now that I'm in college, I hear it less, but like this idea of color blindness and how we're trying to make America into like this colorblind society. Do you think that it hurts like racial identity and like bringing us together as groups rather than like trying to create like one group? Like, how do you think color blindness affects like not just the black race but all racial identity?
That's a great question and a great observation on your part, because it is impossible, in my opinion, to be colorblind. I mean, I'm just going to lay it out there like that. It is absolutely impossible. If you have three people walking down the street and you're half a block away, the first thing you're going to notice is the difference in their colors, if there is one that's different from the other three. So it's not, and I think it does a disservice to you as a human to not say, I know that, so now that you know the different colors, what are you expected to do with that information? If three of them are different color than you, then you go to the other side of the street. I mean, so what do you do with that information if you're supposed to be so colorblind? But it is, I think, humanly impossible. That's one of the things that makes us unique, is that our skin tones are different. That's beauty. It's not saying one is. I never understood that.
Or being hybrid.
Yes, or being,
And it is a privilege.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we want to.
yeah.
And colorblindness, too, is really an idea of a theory that we learn to look at people or not necessarily even look at them, but we learn people because they are people, not because of their color. So it goes to what's called the contact theory, that the more I am in touch with you, I'm in contact with you, we go to social gatherings together, I'm in your home and you're with me, the more those stereotypes that you were talking about will break down. So I began to see you as a person and not your color, meaning that there's this saying that when some people, particularly white women, see a black person coming, a black male, that they clutch their purses a little closer. That's a stereotype. That's seeing color. If we could begin to see each other as people and not hear there's a black guy sitting
That's
back
also
there.
a stereotype.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
Yeah. or there's that person is a homeless person. So they're out to get you, and that's what colorblindness really speaks to. Not necessarily that we don't see colors, but that we don't see people as a color. We see people as people, and altogether that is saying to us. And one thing I want to say about that stereotyping idea. So where does all of this come from? I mean, what makes us think that if I see a black person, that and the police come up, that they're more likely to think that that person will do harm to them, or they have a gun, or even if they go out on a call and there's a mother trying to protect their child and the mother gets arrested. What causes that? And it's all our stereotypes. Where do they come from? They come from what we see on television. More black men are in prisons than any other group of people. And why is that? It's a part of the stereotyping in our country. So when we can stop looking at race, and that makes us think what? That black men go to prison. They're jailbirds. And that becomes a part of our, I call it stinking thinking, that we've got to just break down and begin. We need to see colorblindness in this country, but it's not close. It's nowhere close. Beginning to see people as people.
Other questions?
So I think one of the things that makes America amazing is that we were founded on the idea of having diversity, of all being diverse and having unity. But I also find that a lot of people seem to be afraid of that idea, who say that they're, red-blooded American, and I don't want to stereotype anybody. But when it comes to the idea of diversity, it's scary to so many people, and I find that strange. Why do you think it is?
Education. That's a really good point and question. We have miseducated our children for far too long. We've taken out government courses. We've taken out those courses that would speak the truth. When you have, and I will say, politics has done a lot to that. But make no mistake, fear is a tool of the politician. If you've never been to any of the death camps in Europe, I defy any human to go there and not drop to their knees and pray to the gods they pray to and say, never again. It is the ultimate to do that to people, regardless of what their race is. How could we, how, that's fear. I am most afraid of fear-mongering than anything. To label people, a group of people, into as murderers, rapists, and that dialogue is happening. And that's you asked me the other stereotype that is negative. The black male has been stereotyped ever since blacks were set free in 1865. Birth of a Nation is rapist. The virgin white mother is at risk. I was like, I mean, it's so amazing to me that this could catch on, but it's human nature to be afraid, but the teaching of it is the sin.
So, I have a question. My students have a paper to write on racial identity or the myth of race. How would each of you give recommendations on how to approach that paper?
I'm so glad I'm not in school anymore.
They're writing on racial identity or what?
Or the myth of race.
Oh,
kind of
the myth of race.
I would look at it from historically. Who has written about it that interests you? For me, it's all, I have a group of authors that I trust, and they're not all historical writers, they're fiction. I'm probably too old, but I remember when Star Wars came out, okay? And there was one comedian that shocked everybody. When Star Wars came out, Richard Pryor, the comedian, who's probably not G-rated, but he made a point. He saw the film and he went to the Apollo Theater as a comedy act. Star Wars was the most expensive movie made in the history of Hollywood, and it was looking forward into the future. And his whole shtick was about, have you all seen this movie? These white people can't even dream of the future with a black person in it. Y'all better watch out. And we all laughed and laughed and laughed. And then we thought, we were, what? He said, this is a film about the future. The biggest budget, the biggest creative, blah, blah, blah. They can't even imagine a world. They have all these creatures in it. He says, there's not one black, brown person in this. All the humans are white. And that comedy act changed that film. They went and reshot it, used James Earl Jones's voice as Darth Vader, and used, I can't remember the actor's name now, Pretty Boy, had to be pretty, was in it.
Oh, yeah.
The power of, so write what you want to write. Write your own experiences. That's what I would do. Write what you want to write. Write about your family. Write about you and your, whatever. It's always best when you write from a point of your own personal experience, not what someone thinks you should write about. It's your life. You better start writing about it now, because you're not going to get very many chances to do this after this, because you will be told what to write about, told this and that. I mean, that's my, write about.
Well, I would suggest just do a little research on just what is race, what is meant by race, where did this whole concept come from, and I would particularly look at how economics has affected race, the power and authority thing in this country, and how what we call majority, minority, who's the majority, who's the minority, having nothing to do with numbers. What does that mean? Where did it come from? The power and the authority. Why have some groups been named white as far as the census is concerned, and other groups, minority groups? The more people that you have in a certain group, as far as census in this country, the more benefits that they can get from the government, from that. And so we've been manipulated with this race thing, but there's a reason that all of this stuff with race is going on and has happened. So look beneath the surface and see how we're being manipulated, how our thoughts are being made. Why do we still dislike each other? What's going on? How did I get here? Who has said or done something to me to make me believe that? And then you'll go back and you'll think how the television has influenced you, how thoughts and words you've heard from other people have influenced you, and how you need to start thinking and being an independent thinker for yourself. That's the way I would approach it.
I would also ask that, make this statement. My degree is in advertising marketing. That's when the light bulb went off for me, literally. After being in engineering for 2 years and then music and theater, and then I took a course in marketing. And I went, oh my goodness. The biggest export in America is not General Motors. It is Madison Avenue. We have taught the world to be consumers. Think about that. The revolution is in television, is in advertising. That's where most of our images come back and into. All races are equal when it comes to Madison Avenue. Trust me. Because it's about the money. It's about where the dollar exchanges hands. They will sell anything in 30 seconds. They don't care what race you are. But then you have to realize, what is the price of that ticket? Are they stereotyping us? And then the other question I would ask you all, how many of you have interracial marriages in your families? It's more than I thought, yeah. So do I. I mean, yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all. Great questions. Great class. And thank you, Mike, for putting this on. This is
Yes.
very, very
Excellent.
excellent. Yeah.